Hey there and welcome back to another Disney video. And I feel like we're at the point where we can recognize that animated films can tell deep and meaningful stories, right? Where we can actually accept that even though the films of our childhood, or even films releasing today, are designed to be primarily family entertainment, they can still be meaningful on an emotional level, in the same way that art house films can be. I mean, when I was growing up, all through high school, I'd hear about how animation is a child's medium, that it doesn't tell deep stories, that it's an attraction, a theme park experience, not true cinema, just surface level excitement. Basically the same sort of inane accusations that get leveled at bigger blockbuster films today, like the MCU. It's basically pointless vitriol designed to tear down the medium for the crimes of existing and doing well financially compared to other films. But luckily, the last decade or so has really seen the rise of the animated medium in the public sphere as a legitimate storytelling medium. I mean, people always looked fondly on Pixar, but to hear people talk about them now, it's almost like they're analysing a holy text. And while people had great love and nostalgia for the classics that were churned out during the Disney Renaissance, they were looked at as just that, fun and nostalgic romps. But now, people treat them as you would treat actual art from the actual Renaissance. And now more big name actors are signing up for the opportunity to perform in the medium. More directors and producers are taking the plunge as they feel animation is a better way to tell their story rather than traditional live action. Anime is gaining a huge mainstream popularity in the West and is earning more and more critical acclaim. Animation is now cool, it's trendy, it's popular, and it's respected. Well, at least most of it is. We sit back and we praise the last 20 years of Pixar. We laud the Disney Renaissance as some of the most heartwarming and beautiful storytelling ever. We celebrate the rebirth of Disney in the 2010s and now into the 2020s. And yet, there is one era that goes forgotten. The 2000s. The post-Renaissance era. An era that really had nothing defining them or any linking factors whatsoever. An era that saw Disney scrambling for a new method of storytelling via a whole lot of experimentation as they battled the rise of massive new franchises like Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings, as well as the return of Star Wars in the prequel trilogy. We saw films like The Emperor's New Groove, Home on the Range, Bolt, Brother Bear, Chicken Little, Dinosaur, Fantasia 2000, Lilo and Stitch, Atlantis, Meet the Robinsons, Treasure Planet. And just from that list alone, I guarantee there is at least one that you have completely forgot existed. Seriously, I honestly always forget that Atlantis exists. I mean, who cares about that movie? It has to be the most forgettable Disney film of all time. It honestly boggles my mind. Anyway though, despite that long list of veritable Oscar contenders, they somehow managed to not gross very well at the box office, and did not enjoy much critical acclaim at the time. I know. What a shocker. All except one. Lilo and Stitch. A movie about an alien criminal who crash lands on Earth, and more specifically Hawaii, and finds a family. And let's be real, this film did far better than it had any right to. I mean, it had a deeply cheesy plot bunny, and is right smack dab in the middle of Disney's second dark age. But despite all of that hanging against it, it's still currently sitting pretty, with an 86% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a gross of $273 million off a budget of $80 million. Not bad, all things considered. But despite this being a sole bright spot in what was quite sadly a decade of wall-to-wall mediocrity, although Bolt, Brother Bear, Emperor's New Groove and Treasure Planet are classics, fight me, I feel like nobody ever brings up Lilo and Stitch when they want to talk about really deep and meaningful animated classics. And I honestly have no clue as to why that's the case. And look, I get there is a bit of controversy surrounding the film, sort of trivializing and at times seeming a little mocking of traditional Hawaiian culture, and that there's been some pushback towards it in that regard. But even that doesn't really explain the apparent apathy to which this film's treated. Because look at it from this perspective. The majority of other Disney films that have racist undertones or characters, like Dumbo or Lady and the Tramp, or films that are culturally insensitive, like perhaps Pocahontas, or even just films that blatantly exploit the culture they're representing, like Mulan or to an extent Aladdin, these get talked about shit tons. Even if it's in a negative way, they're still wellsprings of discussion, both good and bad, and many, despite whatever problems they may have with them, are held up as classics of the genre and as triumphs of storytelling. Except Pocahontas. Nobody talks about that film, because it's boring. Yeah, big call, but it's true and you know it. So I don't really think you can write off the lack of care that Lilo and Stitch is treated to as some sort of modern day pushback of PC culture. So what is it? I mean, is it because of when it came out? Was it because it was lost in the shuffle as it was surrounded on all sides by huge name franchise releases and poor quality Disney films bookending it into Disney canon? Is that why this film's faded into obscurity? Because it certainly has nothing to do with quality. This film is legit good. Seriously, if somebody pitched this to me in a boardroom meeting, I would laugh them out of the building. After all, it's pretty much just E.T. if E.T. was a trigger-happy koala. Who would want to watch that? Many people, apparently. And honestly, after seeing the film, you can really understand why. Because underneath all the trappings, all the lasers, all the silly jokes, this film has got some serious heart. On one hand, you have the story of Stitch, an alien experiment who's been bred for war and destruction. An alien who has no understanding of what it means to have a family and what it means to be loved, cherished, and cared for. He has nobody, and is due to be sentenced to, was it death? Just for the crime of existing? It's stated that he was never built for a greater purpose other than destruction, and that he literally has nothing else. Is that not some of the most depressing shit you've ever heard? But this little girl takes him in, despite his rage and him not being a cute little puppy. And she doesn't give up on him. She loves him and she cares for him. And she teaches him that he doesn't have to be evil. He can be good too. And it's all the more equally touching and heartbreaking as it mirrors Lilo's own behaviour. A little girl who's lost her parents in a car accident and now only has her sister. A lonely little girl who's bullied by her peers and fears she's never going to be good enough. Who yearns for that feeling of family that she lost and who finds it in this little demon koala alien monster. They mirror each other in their unfiltered emotions, and at the same time, Lilo recognizes what she truly needs and gives that to Stitch. Just unconditional love and patience. And then, whilst all that's going on, you have the story of Nani, who's had to put her life on hold after the death of her parents to essentially become a single parent to her younger sister. She's struggling to hold down a job, she's left her dreams behind, and is now having to dodge Child Protective Services who believe she may not be a fit guardian and could try to take Lilo away from her. But despite all of these struggles, she still does her best for Lilo's well-being, adopting a pet in the hopes that Lilo will find company, even though it's an extra mouth to feed. And despite all the extra stresses in her life, she does it anyway, because she truly cares about her sister's upbringing and emotional well-being. And that's not even mentioning her whole romance subplot with David, which really just shows off where she should be at that stage in her life, being able to go on dates with him, but has responsibilities she has to take care of instead. And just a side note, David is such a genuinely good guy. He doesn't move on or pressure Nani, and he honestly tries to help them in the best way that he can. Now, if that's not one of the best examples of a male love interest in a Disney film, I don't know what is. And we haven't even covered the comic relief portions of the story, which follow Jumba and Pleakley as they try to capture Stitch and similarly find a new family. And also the shark guy as he moves to neutralize the threat and ends up making himself the villain. Jesus, this movie just has so many layers. And those feels. Come on now. But beyond just the feels, this movie is actually genuinely funny. Even today, there are so many parts of the movie that make me want to laugh. And not just the stupid slapstick absurd stuff like Pleakley getting swarmed by mosquitoes, or David setting the restaurant on fire. But it's the smaller, more ridiculous things that are never even mentioned, like how Pleakley and Jumba have terrible disguises, and yet nobody notices they're aliens. Or that despite everybody in the world being able to tell that Stitch is clearly not a dog, as he can walk on two legs and can speak, nobody does anything about it. They just awkwardly walk away. Or the big intimidating ex-CIA agent turned social worker who looks like he could crush your skull one-handed. He's built like a freaking titan. And what's his name? Something cool and intimidating, right? Oops, no, it's actually Mr. Bubbles. The humour just feels universally hilarious, from whether you're 5 years old to 90. Look, you might not find that funny, yet I laugh to it to this day thinking about it. And that's not to mention that the soundtrack is also ridiculously good too. And to be fair, they had a significant cheat sheet compared to other Disney films where all their songs are pretty much originals, whilst here they use predominantly Elvis songs. But regardless, it framed the movie really well and was just such a smart choice for the film. Not to mention their two original songs, the opening and Hawaiian Roller Coaster Ride, Really hit that solid Disney level of quality. And then, on top of all of that, the characterizations are on point too. They feel real, especially for the time that they're written. Lilo is supposed to be like 5 years old or something in the movie, and she feels like that. She's bratty, and she's silly and immature, and she throws proper temper tantrums like only a 5-year-old can, getting pouty and screamy. She lashes out when she's angry, and she can be a little bit violent, and absurdly protective of things she deems to be hers, like Stitch. And I mean, just the choice of name there, Stitch. You can tell a 5-year-old named that dog as soon as you hear the name. And then beyond that, Nani feels real. She's what, 19 or something like that? She isn't the perfect parental figure. She loses her cool. She yells and screams. Her life's a bit of a mess. Much like most 19-year-olds who suddenly find themselves fulfilling a parental role. Stitch is not perfect. He's not very nice. He's violent and crazy and aggressive. He's under-socialized as a character. And that's the beauty of the writing, because that's the starting point of all of these characters. But over time, you see them evolve. You see them grow and change as the narrative continues. They're not stagnant. They have proper arcs, and each of them changes significantly from the beginning of the story to the end. And so, I know that I seem to be saying this a lot lately, but I just feel like Lilo and Stitch is a truly, desperately underrated film. It packs heart and drama, comedy, tragedy, adventure, sci-fi, romance into one awesome little package. What more could you possibly want from a movie? And big call incoming, but I genuinely feel like this movie has so much heart and humour that it outshines a significant amount of the Renaissance films, and those are incredibly good as well. In my view, it's one of their best films. It hits all the correct beats of humour and family, romance, magic sci-fi. And yet despite all that, it feels the most grounded in reality compared to all of Disney's other films. It feels like these people genuinely exist in real life. It really just is the epitome of the phrase, the diamond in the rough. It's a great movie that came out at the wrong time, and now it regularly gets shunted off to the side when we talk about Disney's top films. And that's a shame, because in my view, it is one of Disney's best animated features of all time. And if it didn't exist, the world would look back on the early 2000s era of Disney with even more scorn than they did before. But, as always, these were just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Lilo and Stitch? Like it, hate it? Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.